commodities. Whether they be clothes, bags, shoes, jewelry, pottery, what have you, we are surrounded by commodities. Things that may or may not have a use value that we interact with on a daily basis. Unless you live in a cave on a desert island somewhere, free from human contact, there's no way that you can escape commodity consumption, because unless you're willing to become Diogenes and live in a barrel, a most minimalist existence, you cannot escape commodity consumption. My tie is a commodity. My shirt is a commodity. Everything on sale here is a commodity. Hello and welcome back to the brutal capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur. I hope you're having an amazing day, because if you're having an amazing day, I'm having an amazing day. If I'm having an amazing day, you should be having an amazing day. Today I'm standing outside Sunway Pyramid, which is one of the biggest temples of capitalism in the civilized world. Yes, and this is how we do Christmas in Malaysia. You see, contrary to what a lot of people overseas believe, Malaysia is actually a rather pluralistic and tolerant and multicultural society. Yes, every year, shopping malls are lit, quite literally lit, with Christmas festivities. Well, I don't know about you, but despite all the physical and material trappings of Christmas, I find it really difficult to be merry this Christmas. Because, in case you're not aware, there's quite literally a genocide going on in the birthplace of Jesus Christ, everyone's favorite Palestinian philosopher, right? So, it's a very dystopian Christmas, especially in the capitalist dystopia of Kuala Lumpur, where everyone comes to shopping malls to escape the alienation of their dreary day-to-day life under capitalism. And this really leads into the topic that I would like to talk to you about today, which is commodity fetishism. Now, first, we have to establish what commodity fetishism is not. Most people have a misguided impression of what commodity fetishism is, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that commodity fetishism is the fetishism or fetishization of luxury goods, like expensive jewelry or expensive luxury designer clothes. That's what most people think it is. Well, if you hold the layman definition of commodity fetishism, I can't really blame you, because you haven't really been introduced to any Marxist theory. So I would like to rectify most people's definition of commodity fetishism, including certain academics in Malaysia. Now, I was looking online for a simple way to explain commodity fetishism to people who haven't read Das Kapital and have no prior knowledge on Marxist theory. And I came across an article written by an academic from my alma mater, Sunway University College, which is just a few blocks away from Sunway Pyramid. Now, I spent 1 year in Sunway College before going to Australia to study English and history. But the thing is, even the academic who wrote that essay got the wrong definition of commodity fetishism, because the person in question, whose name I won't mention out of respect for my alma mater, basically fell into the trap of defining commodity fetishism in exactly the same way that most laymen would define it, as the thirst for material goods and conspicuous consumption. So basically, that person or that academic defined commodity fetishization as the irrational thirst for conspicuous consumption under capitalism. But that's not what it really is. So allow me to direct you to Chapter 1 in Das Kapital, Part 4, Fetishization of Commodities. As a general rule, articles of utility become commodities only because they are products of the labor of private individuals or groups of individuals who carry on their work independently of each other. The sum total of the labor of these private individuals forms the aggregate labor of society.
since the producers do not come into social contact with each other until they exchange their products, the specific social character of each producer's labor does not show itself except in the act of exchange. In other words, the labor of the individual asserts itself as a part of the labor of society only by means of the relations which the act of exchange establishes directly between the products and indirectly through them between the producers. To the latter, therefore, the relations connecting the labor of one individual with that of the rest appear not as direct social relations between individuals at work, but as what they really are: material relations between persons and social relations between things. It is only by being exchanged that the products of labor acquire, as values, one uniform social status, distinct from their varied forms of existence as objects of utility.
Now, the commonly understood definition of fetish means an irrational thirst for something. For example, some men from Western countries may develop a fetish for Southeast Asian women due to Orientalist literature, which portrays Southeast Asian women in a certain way, right? But the original definition of fetish did not mean an irrational liking for something, but rather a fetish referred to certain objects which were supposedly imbued with magical powers, like West African amulets or Native American jewelry.
Man's reflections on the forms of social life, and consequently also his scientific analysis of these forms, take a course directly opposite to that of their actual historical development. He begins post festum with the results of the process of development ready to hand before him. The characters that stamp products as commodities and whose establishment is a necessary preliminary to the circulation of commodities have already acquired the stability of natural, self-understood forms of social life, before man seeks to decipher, not their historical character, for in his eyes they are immutable, but their meaning. Consequently, it was the analysis of the prices of commodities that alone led to the determination of the magnitude of value, and it was the common expression of all commodities in money that alone led to the establishment of their characters as values. It is, however, just this ultimate money form of the world of commodities that actually conceals, instead of disclosing, the social character of private labor and the social relations between the individual producers. When I state that coats or boots stand in a relation to linen, because it is the universal incarnation of abstract human labor, the absurdity of the statement is self-evident. Nevertheless, when the producers of coats and boots compare those articles with linen, or what is the same thing, with gold or silver as the universal equivalent, they express the relation between their own private labor and the collective labor of society in the same absurd form.
Now, as I mentioned, we interact with commodities on a day-to-day basis. There's no way you can escape interacting with commodities unless you lived on a remote island with no human contact. The thing is, everything you see around you that's not a person is a commodity. For example, a handbag is a commodity. You might buy yourself a handbag if you need to put your stuff in it, your wallet, your keys, and your medicines, for example. But most people just see it as a handbag, and that's the end of the story. Most people just assume that the handbag sprung up magically out of nowhere, But the reality is that a handbag is actually a commodity that is the sum total of various human relations that are invisible to most of us. Most of us will never meet the people who produce the things that we use on a day-to-day basis, like handbags, clothes, jewelry, if you're a lady. Most of us will never meet and have never met the people who produce the things that we use on a day-to-day basis, such as bags, clothes, jewelry, food, and so on and so forth. Because the producers of these products are hidden from us. Yes, that is what we mean by commodity fetishism, assuming that things have got value in itself without taking into consideration the labor power that produced these things in the first place and the potential exploitation that resulted in these things being created. We assume that these things just sprung up out of nowhere like a magical fetish. I'm using the word in the old-fashioned sense, not the modern sense. But the reality is that these things are produced as a sum total of human relations. I'm not really familiar with the clothes making process. I just breezed through the coat and linen chapter of Capital, didn't pay much attention to it. So I'll use an example that's simpler and perhaps more relevant to us Malaysians. I'll use a more localized example of palm oil. I think palm oil is a good example of a relatable commodity for Malaysians. Now, palm oil is what we use in our Asian cooking. We don't use olive oil, that's white people oil. Horrible for Asian food, by the way. Now, when we talk about the fetishization of commodities, we mean to say that we see this palm oil as inherently valuable in itself, because it helps us in the cooking process, right? It makes our food taste good. And the only value that we assign to it is its monetary value. Okay, but we don't think about the exploitative process. We don't think about the labor process, the complicated labor process which is involved in the production of these useful things that we enjoy. We assume that they just sprung out of nowhere. Yes, we only see the finished product, but we assume that these things have a magical value in themselves because we don't think of the people who produce them. We just think that they sprung up out of nowhere. And the only value that we assign to them is the price tag and not the labor that was involved in their production. Now, the person who hires the hands to produce the palm oil is known as the capitalist, or the owner of the means of production, aka the factory, the tools, and the vehicles used to transport the palm fruit. And I can tell that there are going to be some reactionaries on the other end of the screen saying, aha, there you go, you depend on the capitalist for palm oil, right? So if you hate capitalism so much, why don't you stop using palm oil? But that's where you're wrong, because it's not the capitalist who produced the palm oil. It is the capitalist who hired the hands to produce the palm oil. So if you say we should be grateful to the capitalists for producing the things that we need, you are guilty of exactly the phenomenon that we are describing in this video, commodity fetishism, because you are imbuing a supernatural quality to this capitalist, or you are instilling an undeserved supernatural quality to the owner of the means of production, because he did not produce the goods, but rather he hired people to pluck the fruit, compress the fruit, transport the fruit, and bottle the fruit. In a word, turning it into the finished product known as palm oil. You are treating the capitalist as this all-powerful sorcerer who's able to magically conjure up these commodities on their own without the use of labor power. And in a word, that is what we mean by commodity fetishism. because it is not the capitalist who produced these things with his own hands, but it is he who basically produced these things, in inverted commas, produced these things with exploited labor. All the lovely things that we enjoy under capitalism did not just spring up out of nowhere, and they certainly did not spring up from the hands of the capitalist. These things were produced by the power of labor. It is imperative to add that Marx's chapter on commodity fetishism is not to encourage people to live like paupers and stop using commodities altogether, because laborers or the proletariat labored in order that you may enjoy these commodities. But rather, Marx invites us to think about these commodities not as magical objects or not as inherently valuable in their own right, but rather having the life, the kiss of life, breathed into them by the producer, the labor that produces these things. So again, I must reiterate that socialism is not the romanticization of poverty, and it's certainly not encouraging people to live like monks. We are not saying that you can't use commodities, but rather you should be cognizant of where these commodities came from and the process that is involved in the production of these commodities that you enjoy. Because you see, many of us would like our children to become lawyers, doctors, corporate consultants, high-end professions. We would like our children to enter high-end professions, so to speak. But there's very little respect that's actually given to the people who produce these useful things that we take for granted, because nobody thinks about them. These people are hidden from the spotlight. But these people are really the people who keep society in order, or who keep society floating. Yes, including the delivery drivers and the McDonald's workers as well, who produce the burgers at McDonald's. We hardly ever think about them as necessary for our well-being. It's pretty common in our capitalist society to glorify people such as managing directors, CEOs, datoks and datins. Although frankly most of these people are just useless people with titles, the reality is, with or without these people, society can go on. With or without the professional managerial class, like managing directors or CEOs or what have you, society goes on. But without the people who produce the things that we use on our day-to-day basis, the people who are often ignored and whom we don't think about, without these people, society would go into pandemonium. So what we strive for is basically a world where useful people enjoy a civilized standard of living, and useless people are turned into useful people. That is all we want in a socialist society, and we will achieve it someday. So if you made it this far in the video, thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoy my channel, please don't forget to subscribe, share and like. So in a word, why should the laborers who produce the things we need be living in penury while we get to enjoy these luxuries? Why should the laborers who produce the things that we use be alienated from the products of their own creation, such as the fine cigars or clothes or liquor that they produce? Many of them can't even afford it themselves. Many of the people who work in car factories, for example, cannot even afford to buy the cars that they produce. People who work in Gordon Ramsay's restaurant cannot even afford to eat the food that they serve. Why should they be alienated from the products of their creation? And when you get down to that question, that is the day you become a socialist. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas. May the workers of the world find liberation and happiness. And Selamat Berjuang.